equity, or socialism, or welfare. Welfare is probably a term that we're more familiar with because we have welfare programs in the United States. And one of the biggest arguments in society and in government is whether we should be spending more tax dollars, that is money that belongs to the people that earned that money, but have given it, usually through force, to the government in the form of taxes. And the taxes that are collected by the government can be used for any number of things, like building our infrastructure or creating a military force that can defend us against foreign invasion, or, among other things, welfare. That is giving money to people that don't have jobs to support them and pay for their living way when they can't take care of it themselves. Well, so as we're dealing with the question of welfare, we're dealing with the contrast between a conservative view of things, which says that welfare is really a problem, because we don't want to steal from people and give it to people inefficiently, right? Very poorly, giving only a few cents on the dollar of our taxes paid to people that did not earn that money to begin with. So we have the difference between merit and equity, not equality. Remember, equity as opposed to equality. Equity is something much different. It looks for a specific outcome to make sure that everybody has the same situation resulting from life, as opposed to everybody having the same opportunity to put themselves in a better situation in life. So equity is taking away from the idea of merit. One of the things we see these days is the destruction of this whole idea of DEI, right? Which is what? Something equity and inclusion. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, where people get hired to positions like Supreme Court Justice simply because they're the race or gender that we want to elevate, rather than based upon their work and their history of success or merit, having earned it. So another group, the conservatives like me, tend to look at DEI, and instead of calling it diversity, equity, and inclusion, we call it did not earn it. DEI, did not earn it. And that's probably a good way of describing DEI. It's one illustration of the difference between this idea of merit and equity. So merit is when somebody does earn it. They achieve something. They get promotion or an increase in their wages, or they start a business and that business is a success. Maybe a failure the first few times they try, but ultimately a success, right? Merit, right? Merit versus equity, a guarantee that someone succeeds even if they don't deserve to. If we put someone that doesn't deserve to be in Harvard because they're not smart enough or equipped with the right skills that have equipped them for university education, we'll put them in Harvard in a DEI placement. We're just setting them up for trouble, because they're going to fail when they get into classes and realize they cannot do the work. They can't keep up. So merit wins out in the end, and DEI demonstrates that it itself is the failure in our thinking. We'll do a separate video on merit as well. I'll devote more time to it at some point. One of the phrases, the terms that we've heard come out of this argument between merit and equity started with one of the President George Bush's. And he talked about the soft bigotry of low expectations. What is a low expectation? It means when we think that someone cannot do something, we expect less of them. That's the low expectations. And soft bigotry, well, that's when we say that, look, because of your race or your gender, you're incapable of doing what we would do. That's the bigotry. So the soft bigotry of low expectations. Who wants to be saddled with that kind of label or explanation? Nobody, of course. But refers to holding lower expectations for certain people based on race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, or other characteristics. And it's a subtle and sometimes not so subtle form of discrimination in and of itself. Ideas behind the phrase. It's unintended discrimination. We oftentimes pass a law or implement a policy or take a specific position on certain things based upon what we believe to be the right thing to do in those given situations. But we see that there's a difference in impact or effect on one group in society or another group. We call that a disparate impact. When there's a disparate impact, we assume that, okay, well, there's either some problem with the group within society, or there's a problem with the law or the policy that we're trying to implement. We don't want to label anybody as being defective in any kind of way, so instead we default in favor of saying there's a problem with the policy or the law or the action taken by government. So we look at the laws that have had disparate impact, that, for instance, that have resulted in more black people in America being arrested for certain types of crimes, and said that because of the disparate impact, then obviously there's something wrong with the laws. When in fact, maybe the problem is that that black community tends to commit more laws. If we look at statistics, I guess the most recent statistics that I have found that have a good, solid, complete analysis would be those from 2022. 2022, 13% of the community, 13% of the American population is black, African American. They call themselves African American, but they're not all from Africa, so that's kind of a misnomer. But we do that to be polite because we don't want to offend anybody, right? Which is really taking things a little too far. Sometimes reality means just being blunt and telling the truth, telling things the way they are without trying to soften people's feelings all the time. That's kind of ridiculous. So 13% of the population would be the black community or black population in the United States. And they're responsible for 50% of the violent crime. That would be murders, assaults, robberies. Well, that's pretty disparate income, isn't it? Disparate effect, isn't it? Maybe we need to change those laws and say it's not against the law to murder people. It's not against the law to rob people. Well, we're actually doing that through different things like defund the police and abolish the police and stuff like that, all kinds of stupid things that we've done in the past several years to try to change the disparate income or disparate effect of those laws on the black community and society. We've tried to attack it that way, but when in fact we're coming to realize that no, that crime continues on. We might call it something else. We might even call it a non-crime. For Barack Obama, for instance, when there was a disparate effect of drug laws resulting in higher conviction rates for blacks, he essentially legalized certain drugs or made certain types of crimes non-crimes, suggesting that has lowered the crime rate. In fact, it didn't. Those crimes continued on. They just weren't called crimes anymore. Violent crime in the black community is a real problem, right? And just because we have done some abolish the police or control the police or any number of official and unofficial demonstrations that we've had against policing and enforcing those violent crime laws, it hasn't affected the way things really work. Because maybe the problem is not the laws themselves and the disparate income. Maybe the disparate effect is because the community that commits those crimes really is disproportionately responsible for bad behavior. So when I talk about 13% of the American population being the black community, of that, consider the males are roughly half, maybe a little bit less, so 6%. And of the 6% that are males, we don't see those crimes coming out of 2-year-olds or 10-year-olds. And we don't see it coming out of people that are 70 years old or my age and older. And we see it coming out of people that are in their teens until about 40 years old. So about 3.5% of the American population is responsible for 50% of the violent crime. That's pretty disparate effect, isn't it? Disparate income. It's getting a little personal, isn't it? My income sucks. So maybe that's why I keep defaulting to that comment. But that's my fault, not anybody else's. So we lower expectations to people that fit into the disparate income thing. And we allow them to get away with, well, literally murder or robbery or other types of violent crimes in order to make ourselves feel like we're not being discriminatory in our laws and our law enforcement. It's pretty silly, really. Enforcing certain laws is really not that complex. We'll talk about basic law enforcement laws and what it takes to prosecute somebody and have them found guilty of a crime in another video. Maybe the next video we'll tackle that. It's not a difficult concept, but we'll discuss that later. Counterproductive compassion. When we hand out tax dollars that people have earned and had stolen from them by the government through taxation, and we hand it to the people that don't earn that money, right? They get in the habit of not earning. And so our compassion of giving them the money sends a signal to the recipients that they don't have to work for that money. And in fact, they shouldn't work. Some of the money that they receive is conditional. It's conditioned on the fact that they do not have a job or do not have a means to satisfy whatever that need happens to be. Sometimes the money can be given to a group that is a divorced or broken up home, or where the father is not living at home, right? And so the mother needs help from the government in order to take care of the children that she is raising as a result of having one man that is not in her home, or other men, maybe multiple men, that have been responsible for bringing about the lives that she now has to take care of. We have compassion on that person, so we want to give them money, but we establish that that person receives that money because there's not a man in the house. In other words, we set up rules that essentially legitimize broken homes, rather than incentivizing people to stay together and have a man and a woman, a father and a mother in the same home. We actually exalt or support people that do not have a man and woman. It's counterproductive. Counterproductive. Our compassion then actually turns to be a very hateful response. We're destroying the opportunity, the means, the motivation for merit, and we're taking away the opportunity for families to come together and raise children in a productive manner. Studies have demonstrated that when children are raised in a home where there's a father and a mother in the house, those children have a better possibility, better opportunity to be successful in their later lives. No, I speak about that objectively, because personally, I destroyed my families. And so my family has not gotten the benefit of having me, their father, in the home. I'm at fault. In other words, when the fathers are not part of the children's lives, the children's lives are tweaked in such a way that they start off on the wrong foot. They do not have the same opportunities that everybody else has. I know that from personal experience. This affects them in workplace. It affects them in education. It affects them in social programs and expectations for welfare in the future. It puts them on their back feet, and they stay there, right? So, soft bigotry of low expectations doesn't inherently argue against social welfare programs. It's possible to have social welfare programs that encourage merit in working in order to get money from the government, that can actually encourage family unity and a father and mother coming together and remaining in that same family. But we don't do that. And generally speaking, we do not do that. So social welfare programs are largely a failure. And they're a failure because, well, we focus on equity and not on merit. So what is the Christian thing to do? Compassion, charity is the Christian thing to do. But sometimes that compassion and that charity comes about when we best elevate and support opportunities and merit for people to take their lives under their control and do good things with it. Okay, we'll talk more about this and the legal system in the next couple of videos.